What if I told you that every time you talk about your problems to the wrong people, you are not just wasting your words, you are also weakening your mind? Neuroscience shows something very interesting. When you repeatedly speak about your stress and struggles without any clear solution or purpose, your brain starts to accept that you are the problem instead of the situation. The neural circuits linked with pain, shame, and helplessness become more active. Over time, you begin to strengthen a state of powerlessness inside yourself. I am not here to tell you to suffer in silence. I am here to tell you to use your silence wisely. Because in a world that encourages oversharing and emotional release everywhere, one of the strongest things you can do is protect your peace, process your pain privately, and turn it into strength instead of sympathy. Oversharing slowly reduces emotional strength because every time you release your problems without boundaries, you are training your brain to look for relief through expression instead of real solutions. Expressing emotions can be healthy when done in the right place and with the right intention. But constantly depending on others to unload every negative feeling can create an emotional dependency. In this state, your emotional balance starts depending on outside responses, sympathy, or validation. This becomes dangerous over time. Instead of building your own internal ability to handle stress, control anxiety, and process pain, you start handing that responsibility to other people. Many of them are not even capable of helping you properly. When this becomes a habit, your mind starts to believe that talking about a problem is the same as solving it, but that is a false belief. Talking is not action. Talking is not solution. And even worse, talking too much about your struggles to the wrong people can increase feelings of being stuck, helpless, or ashamed. Every time you repeat your hardship, especially to someone who cannot handle it with maturity or wisdom, you reinforce a mental image of yourself as someone who is always suffering. Slowly, it stops being just an experience and starts becoming your identity. The more you describe your wounds without purpose, the more deeply those wounds settle into your self-image. It becomes less about healing and more about reliving pain again and again. Neuroscience tells us that repetition strengthens neural pathways. So if your repeated thoughts and words are like, I am struggling, I am hurt, or I cannot handle this, then those pathways become stronger each time. This creates a mindset built around limitation. You begin to feel weaker instead of stronger, and it becomes harder to take action because your identity slowly merges with the idea of being someone who always struggles. This is one of the hidden dangers of oversharing. Another effect of oversharing is how it changes your relationship with your own mind. When you constantly express your problems outwardly, you never give yourself enough space to sit in quiet and think deeply, but silence is where clarity is formed. If you keep speaking too quickly and to too many people, you interrupt your own inner thinking process. Oversharing also reduces the value of your own words. If you keep repeating your problems, even you start to stop paying attention to them. Your own voice becomes background noise. And when your voice loses importance in your own ears, you stop taking yourself seriously. Your emotions deserve attention, but not constant repetition without direction. The truth is, many people you talk to are not really listening to help you. They are listening through their own mindset, their own insecurities, and sometimes even their hidden jealousy. When you overshare, you give access to a very sensitive part of yourself, your vulnerability, and not everyone deserves that access. Some people will use it, some will silently judge it, and some will only collect information. The more you speak, the more they form an image of you. Even if it is not true, they may start seeing you as weak, unstable, or incapable. You might simply be venting, but in their mind, they are building a story about who you are. Most people do not listen with pure intention. They listen through the filter of their own life experience, their emotions, and their ego. So even when they appear supportive, they are often comparing your situation with their own standards. For example, if you talk about money problems to someone who takes pride in financial success, they may respond with quiet superiority instead of real empathy. If you talk about relationship pain to someone who has their own unresolved emotional wounds, they may project their issues onto your story instead of understanding you. People hear your words, but they interpret them through their own mindset. That is why advice is often weak, responses are often shallow, and true understanding is rare. Many times after sharing your struggles, you do not feel better. You feel exposed. That is because deep inside you sense that the other person was not fully present with you. They were not truly inside your experience. They were only observing it from outside. Another reason people tend to judge is that it gives them a small sense of superiority. When you reveal your weaknesses, doubts, or failures, you unintentionally give them a psychological advantage. They may not use it openly, but they remember it. It becomes part of how they see you. Later, when they think about you, that information influences their opinion. They remember your weak moment and quietly place themselves above you, not because they are truly better, but because it makes them feel more stable in comparison. Even good people can fall into this pattern without realizing it. Their tone may change slightly. Their body language may shift. Instead of seeing you as a complete person, they start seeing you as someone defined by a problem. This is why emotional discipline is important. Not everyone should have access to your inner world. Your struggles are not entertainment. They are not casual stories. They are parts of your personal growth process. When you expose too much to the wrong listeners, you do not just risk being misunderstood, you risk being redefined incorrectly in their minds. And once that image is formed, it is very hard to change. Venting without action also creates another issue. It keeps you stuck in a loop. When you repeatedly express frustration, sadness, or confusion, but take no real step toward change, your mind slowly learns to accept helplessness. It starts associating emotional release with comfort, even if nothing improves in reality. At first it may feel like relief, but over time it becomes a trap. Your nervous system begins to rely on venting as a way to feel better, instead of relying on action. So you keep talking, but you stop growing. This builds an identity around being someone who struggles, instead of someone who overcomes. You become more skilled at explaining your problems than solving them, and each time you repeat this cycle, you reinforce the belief that you are stuck. Your words are powerful. They shape how your brain understands reality. If your language is full of "nothing works," "I am always unlucky," or "this always happens to me," then your mind starts to build that as your truth. Even casual conversations can act like repeated mental programming. Instead of saying things that push you forward, you start repeating statements that keep you in the same place. Over time, this becomes your mental script, and your behavior begins to follow that script automatically. Speaking about a problem once to understand it is fine, but repeating it again and again to different people creates an echo chamber inside your mind. The problem starts to feel larger than it really is because you keep feeding it attention. And attention is what gives thought strength. When your focus is constantly on what is wrong, your emotional state starts to align with that focus. Your thinking becomes narrow. Your energy drops. Your mind stops noticing solutions because it is fully occupied with the problem itself. Some people even become attached to their problems without realizing it. The problem becomes part of their identity, part of their daily conversations, and even part of how they connect with others. Letting go of it feels uncomfortable because it is familiar, but growth requires stepping away from that comfort. It requires moving from repeated expression to quiet action. There is also another hidden effect. When you constantly talk about your struggles, people start to expect you to always be in that state. They begin to define you based on your problems instead of your potential. And slowly, that external image starts to influence how you see yourself too. This is why not everyone should know everything about your inner world. Some things need time, silence, and personal processing before they are shared. Some people do not realize that when they constantly share their problems, they are also shaping how others define them. Over time, people stop seeing your full personality and start focusing only on what you repeatedly reveal. If you always talk about struggle, stress, or failure, that becomes the version of you that lives in their mind. Even when your reality changes, their perception often stays the same. And perception is powerful. It affects how people speak to you, how they treat you, and sometimes even what opportunities they believe you deserve. You may be capable of growth, strength, and progress, but if people have already formed a fixed image of you as someone who is always struggling, they will unconsciously respond to you through that lens. This is why emotional privacy is not weakness. It is control. It is not about hiding your life. It is about protecting your mind from being shaped by careless interpretations. Another important truth is that some people secretly enjoy hearing about your problems, not always in an obvious way, but in subtle psychological ways. It can make them feel more stable about their own life. When they hear that someone else is struggling, failing, or confused, it creates a silent comparison in their mind. It helps them feel, even temporarily, that they are doing better. This does not always come from bad intentions. Sometimes it is unconscious, but the result is still the same. Your vulnerability becomes emotional material for someone else's inner world, and not everyone handles that responsibly. Some people also use your problems as a form of quiet power. When you share too much, you give them information about your fears, your weak points, and your emotional reactions. Even if they never use it directly against you, it still changes the dynamic. They now know more about you than you know about them, and that imbalance can subtly affect how they behave around you. There is also gossip. This is one of the most common risks of oversharing. You may think you are speaking to someone trustworthy, but your words may not stay there. They get repeated, reshaped, and sometimes exaggerated. Your private struggle slowly becomes public conversation, and you may never even know how far it has spread. By the time it reaches you again, it is no longer your story in its original form. It becomes a distorted version shaped by other people's interpretations. And that can damage your reputation, even when you did nothing wrong except trust the wrong listener. Some people may even pretend to care while secretly enjoying the information. They act supportive in front of you but later use your situation as something to talk about with others. This is why blind trust in emotional conversations can be risky. Not everyone who listens to your pain is there to help you rise. Some are just curious, some are entertained, some are comparing, and some are silently judging. This is the reality of human behavior. That is why discernment matters. You need to understand who deserves access to your emotional world and who does not. Your inner struggles are not casual information. They are sensitive parts of your journey. Another hidden danger of oversharing is that it reduces your own self-respect over time. When you repeatedly talk about your problems but take no real action, a part of your mind starts noticing that gap between words and behavior. You begin to lose trust in yourself. At first, it is small, but slowly it grows into self-doubt. You start thinking, I always talk about my problems, but I never change them. That thought weakens motivation. And once self-trust weakens, action becomes even harder. This creates a cycle. You feel bad, you talk about it, you feel temporary relief, but nothing changes. Then you feel worse, and you repeat the cycle again. Over time, you become fluent in explaining your struggle, but disconnected from solving it. This is how victim identity slowly forms. Not because life is always unfair, but because repetition without action builds a mindset of helplessness. Your brain starts to prefer emotional release over uncomfortable progress. Venting feels easier than discipline. Talking feels safer than changing. But the comfort of expression slowly replaces the power of transformation. There is another subtle effect. The more you talk about your problems, the more your mind rehearses them. Every time you describe your pain, you are not just communicating it, you are re-experiencing it mentally. This keeps the emotional loop active. So even when the situation is not actively hurting you in the present moment, your repeated storytelling keeps it alive inside your mind. You are not just remembering it, you are reliving it again and again through language. This is why some people feel stuck for years even when their situation has already changed slightly. Their words keep the old version of reality alive inside their thinking. Silence, on the other hand, creates space. Space for reflection, space for clarity, space for better decisions. When you stop constantly externalizing your emotions, your mind is forced to look inward and process things more deeply instead of repeatedly expressing them. That internal processing is where real change begins, because awareness without constant narration becomes stronger. You start noticing patterns instead of repeating stories. You start thinking in solutions instead of descriptions. But when your focus is always outward, always on talking and explaining, your mind becomes occupied with expression instead of evolution. Another important point is that oversharing often creates emotional dependency. When you get used to talking about your problems to feel better, your brain starts linking relief with external conversations. So whenever something goes wrong, your first instinct becomes finding someone to talk to instead of thinking independently. This weakens emotional independence. Because your stability is no longer coming from within, it is coming from responses, reactions, and validation from others. And those responses are unpredictable. Sometimes people understand you, sometimes they do not. Sometimes they support you, sometimes they judge you. So your emotional state becomes unstable, depending on who you talk to and how they respond. This is why strong people are not those who never share anything. They are the ones who understand timing, purpose, and boundaries in sharing. They know what to keep inside for reflection, what to share for guidance, and what to keep completely private for protection. Your silence is not emptiness, it is processing. It is strength being built quietly. When you constantly expose your struggles, you also reduce the depth of your own thinking. Because every time you speak, you release part of the mental pressure that could have been used to think more deeply. Silence forces depth. Talking sometimes replaces depth with temporary relief. That is why many breakthroughs in life do not come from constant discussion. They come from quiet thinking, focused reflection, and internal clarity. At the end of the day, the goal is not to become emotionally closed. The goal is to become emotionally intelligent with your sharing. Not everyone deserves your story. Not every situation needs your explanation, and not every feeling needs to be broadcast. Because once you understand the power of silence, you stop wasting energy on people who were never equipped to carry your emotions in the first place.